Should be able to just restart it. All right, so how's everybody doing?
Good.
Good, good, that's good. Before I get started, a couple of things I just like to say to start things off is, first of all, my name's Andy Trice. I'm a developer evangelist with Adobe. And I'm here to talk about an introduction to mobile development with PhoneGap. Now, whenever I give presentations, I like to treat them as more of a conversation as opposed to, I'm up here just preaching. So if at any point anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hand. My role as a developer evangelist is to help you guys understand what the technology can do and how it can apply to your workflow. So any questions are outstanding. And then also, what often happens is, let's say we have a question from this side of the room, that spurs thought, and this side of the room there's another question, and next thing you know, we have a really great dialogue happening. So I absolutely encourage questions, and there's no such thing as a bad question. So, how many people? I think I know the answer to this already, but how many people would consider themselves developers? Almost all the hands, that's what I was expecting. How many people would consider themselves designers? Okay, a smaller number of hands. And how many people are neither? One hand, all right. I just like to understand who I'm talking to, because what's really interesting is talking about mobile technology and how it's used, and a lot of people have a different understanding of just what exactly it is that we're talking about and how that applies to day-to-day life. So this is going to be kind of an introductory level presentation on PhoneGap. I will be doing another session same time tomorrow where it's going to be a little bit more advanced enterprise application development with PhoneGap. So in this session, I really just want to kind of give an introduction to technology, what it is, kind of how you go about using it, and really just understanding the core fundamentals of it, and then also show you guys some applications, like what you can actually build with this. So, how many people have heard of PhoneGap before this? And how many people have actually used it? Just a small number of hands. Okay, good. I hope that by the end of this, all of you are going to want to run out of this room and be like, I need to start using PhoneGap right now. So what is PhoneGap? It's an application container that allows you to build natively installed mobile applications using web standards technology. So you build your apps, you can deploy them into iTunes or Google Play, whatever ecosystem you want to target, and you're building the entire app without having to learn any of the native development skills. You don't have to learn Objective-C, you don't necessarily have to use Java. If you're already using HTML and CSS and JavaScript, you already know these skills, you can then use those skills to build natively installed mobile apps. So how does it work? The best way to picture a PhoneGap application, okay, is there enough contrast? Can you guys see this in the back? I know some of the text is going to be small, but I apologize. So the best way to think about it, here's my mobile device. I have a web view. It's based on the system web view of whatever platform you want to target. And that web view is 100% width and 100% height. And now, everything that you see inside that web view is a user interface for your application. So any of the buttons, whatever data might be displayed, what content, whatever navigational elements, it's all built using web standard technologies. So you use HTML to create the structure, you use CSS to determine how that gets presented, and then when people interact with it, they don't know that it's actually a web view, and there's no differentiation between an app experience as opposed to a PhoneGap experience. It is an application with that UI rendering layer being the system web view. So the second part of PhoneGap is it gives you an API that allows you to access underlying native operating system functionality. So it gives you the ability to access things like contacts on a device. You can read and write from the local file system. You can access multimedia, so you can take pictures with a camera, you can record video, you can record audio, you can reliably play back audio across different platforms. And has anyone ever tried to play back audio on lots of different platforms using HTML5 audio? Nobody? Don't do it. It's painful. Actually, some of the newer devices and newer platforms are better, but if you're targeting things like Android 2.x, it's a painful experience. But PhoneGap also gives you an API to access things like sensor information. So that's GPS, that's accelerometer, that's your compass. And all of these APIs to underlying native operating system functionality are JavaScript APIs. So you don't have to build any of your application in native code to take advantage of these features. So if I want to interact with the camera, I want to take a picture of this lovely audience, I can do that completely in JavaScript. Now, there is an additional component that you can create what are called native plugins, and native plugins give you the ability to expose custom native code to a JavaScript interface for use within PhoneGap applications, but I'll get into that more in a little bit. The third aspect of PhoneGap, sorry, I'm tripping over these. It gives you the ability to take these assets that you've used to create your application, the HTML files, the CSS files, the JavaScript files, and any images, whatever content you want included within your app, to package that up into an archive that can then be deployed to the standard application ecosystems. So if you want to get into iOS, it can go through the App Store, it's an IPA file. For Android, it's an APK file, the same kind of file format that you would use to then upload to Google Play, or the Amazon market, or the Barnes & Noble market. If you want to deploy to BlackBerry, it's a .bar file, at least that's for the latest versions. And if you're targeting Windows Phone, it's a .zap file. These are the standard file formats that you would, if you're creating a native app, the end result is, it's an IPA file, it's an APK file. These types of files that you then upload to the standard ecosystem, and you now have an app in the App Store. So why would you want to use PhoneGap? Now, before I go too far into why you want to use PhoneGap, it's important to understand where PhoneGap kind of falls in the spectrum of things, where if we compare it, on this end we're talking about a native app experience, and on this end we're going to talk about a HTML app running in the system web browser, or the mobile web browser, so on Safari on iOS or Chrome on Android. Now, all the way at this end on the native layer, I should probably put a slide up here that describes this, otherwise I'm just waving my arms around. But on the native side, you have the absolute best performance, and you have the access to every native operating system functionality, like every API. However, it's written in a native language, and it's also only deployable through the App Store. On the opposite end, on the mobile web spectrum, you have an app, it's an HTML-based app, it's accessible to every device, everywhere, all from one code base, but because it's on the mobile web, it can't access that underlying operating system functionality. PhoneGap sits dead center. So it gives you the ability to deploy to app stores, but have a single code base that runs all the different platforms that are supported, and it also gives you the ability to access underlying native operating system functionality. So if you are creating the next awesome game, and it has to be the absolute best performance, absolute best graphics, you want to go with a native app. If you're creating something that has to run on every device known to man, including ones that haven't been released yet, and including ones that were released 15 years ago, go with a pure HTML mobile web solution. But if you want to get your app into the app stores, you want to have one code base, put it everywhere, PhoneGap is absolutely a tool that you can use in that kind of a scenario. So why do you want to use PhoneGap? How many people have ever tried to build a multi-platform app experience? Just a couple of hands. It's a really fun task. It can also be really challenging. You have lots and lots of different variables. This image looks really washed out on here, but I'm showing an app, which I'm going to demo the app in a little bit, that's running on Amazon Kindle Fire, it's running on an iPad, it's running on Barnes & Noble Nook, it's running on an Atrix, it's running on a Samsung Galaxy Tab. You can tell this picture was actually taken about 18 months ago, because these aren't all necessarily the most popular devices today. But it's an app, it runs on all these different platforms, and it's a single code base. Now, when you're building these types of experiences, you have to consider a couple things. It's interesting, my transition didn't work. Basically, if you think back to 5-6 years ago, for all intents and purposes, before the iPhone kind of revolutionized how people interact with their mobile devices, we were really targeting one form factor. We were targeting desktop computing. Everybody accessed things through either an app on their computer or through the web browser on their computer, and they were really targeting just the input paradigm of a keyboard and mouse. Today, we have lots of devices, lots of form factors, lots of pixel densities, and the way that people interact with those devices has fundamentally changed. It's based on touch, and it's the tactile user experience, as opposed to I'm sitting there with a keyboard and mouse at my desk. PhoneGap gives you the ability to take advantage of all these different variables and have one code base that can then be deployed to lots and lots of different platforms. So it can be deployed to all those different devices with the different screen sizes, the different operating systems, different API levels. And so today, if you download PhoneGap right now or go to PhoneGap.com, you can have one code base that you can then deploy to iOS, to Android, to Windows Phone, to BlackBerry devices, Samsung Bada, Symbian, HP WebOS, Tizen, which is really washed out, you can't really see it here, and also Windows 8. And that's just without anything special. You go, PhoneGap.com, download it, you get all these features right now. What is with all my transitions? Hold on. That's better. So why would you want to use PhoneGap? One of the first reasons is it's a lower barrier of entry into mobile development. How many people want to write apps for iOS devices? Show of hands. I said that's it. I know this is organized by a Java developer group, so is this a pro Android, super pro Android crowd? Yeah, okay. How many of you, let me rephrase, then want to write mobile apps on Android, but want to leverage, let's say, existing skills for HTML web development? That's more hands, that's better. PhoneGap gives you the ability to leverage those skills that you already have and lower the barrier of entry into mobile development. So, you know, let's say if I already know HTML, I already know jQuery for building apps, I already know how to style things, use CSS. I can take these existing skills and then get into mobile development, not just on Android devices, but on all those different platforms without having to learn an entirely new skill set. Yes, you will have to learn the deployment paradigm, so the App Store kind of paradigm, what's the differences with the Apple App Store versus Google Play, but you'll be able to access those different things without having to learn how to build a new kind of application. With that lower barrier of entry, it's also a reduced number of required developer skills to build and maintain these kinds of applications. So as I mentioned, if you wanted to target iOS, we'll just take iOS and Android, because they're the two biggest right now. You don't have to learn, you know, two different skill sets. You don't have to maintain two different code bases. You really just have to have that fundamental understanding of how do you create like rich HTML-based application experiences. In addition to this, not just PhoneGap's apps necessarily, but cross-platform mobile applications are in general less expensive to build and maintain over a long-term period of time. There was an independent study by Gartner, the market research firm, I think it was mid last year, and in this study they published that a cross-platform mobile strategy is in general, a native mobile strategy is in general 170 to 200% more expensive than a cross-platform mobile strategy. So that means if you're trying to build an application that targets multiple platforms, and the more number of platforms that you're trying to support, the expense of that increases. Now, in addition to PhoneGap being a lower barrier of entry into mobile development, reduced number of required developer skills, so you don't have to have the Objective-C experts and the Java experts and the C# experts if you're trying to target Windows devices. You can also integrate with any existing HTTP-based system. So let's say you already have a server infrastructure, you're serving web services or REST services, whether it's JSON or whether it's XML. As long as these services already exist and they're exposing content, you can use the same skills that you may be using in an existing AJAX application to then pull down the content from those systems, reuse all of it, reuse all the same services. You can even reuse a lot of the UI rendering code if you're rendering things dynamically on the client side, and take advantage of these mobile applications using all the infrastructure that you already have available. And now, since you're maybe using services and infrastructure that you already have available, it's important to point out that what you're using to create these applications can actually be shared across, let's say, a web browser implementation, whether it's a desktop or mobile web browser implementation, and then also the mobile implementation. So, mentioned earlier, if you're using jQuery to manipulate the UI, you can still use jQuery. If you're using, let's say, images and CSS styles to determine how that UI is going to look inside the desktop web browser, you can leverage those exact same CSS styles and those images inside the UI in the mobile application. If you want to use, let's say, a specific data visualization library, that renders in HTML5 canvas. Well, you can use that exact same data visualization library inside a PhoneGap app than you can on a mobile web application, or even a desktop web application. So because it's all based on web standard technologies, anything that can be rendered in the browser can then be used inside of a PhoneGap application. So there's a lot of reuse of both skills and all prior assets in order to create these different mobile experiences. So one of the #1 questions I get is, what does a PhoneGap app look like? How many people assume that a PhoneGap app, because it's based on HTML, looks like a web page with links, hyperlinks, and underlined text? Okay, no, I get a lot more hands than that. Is everybody still sleeping? No laughs either? Wow. But basically, a PhoneGap application can look like anything. Now, with HTML, it's really easy to create highly styled interfaces. You can create basically, whatever the limit of your imagination is the limit of that type of experience that you can create with HTML. A couple examples. How many people have heard of the Olympics? Okay, now I'm getting more audience participation. I appreciate that. So the BBC, last year, their app for Olympics coverage, it's a PhoneGap app. I know it's available on iOS and Android. I'm not sure which other platforms they targeted, but everything that you see here in this application is actually HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This included live news feeds, access to video feeds, and it was basically their app for coverage of whatever events were happening with the Olympics. Unfortunately, I can't demo this one because it was only available in the UK, and I couldn't download it here in the US. But everything that you see there, including the bars at the bottom, the content at the top, like the headers, everything is just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Some of that you might be thinking well, yeah, that's pretty easy to style. It's not all that creative. But then let's talk about something that's a little bit more out there as far as the user interface is concerned. This is an app called Zombie Jombie. It's actually a really popular turn-based application, turn-based game. I'm not the primary target for playing this game, so I try to play it. I really don't understand it at all, but I don't know. But as you can see, everything here is actually HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's really animated, and I can show it on devices if anyone wants to see it. It's really animated. It's got sound effects. It's a game experience, an immersive experience. It doesn't look like just text on a page with hyperlinks underlined and tabular layout of information. It's a really creative experience. It's all implemented using pure web standards technology. Wikipedia is another one. So Wikipedia is a little bit more of the classic app look and feel, but everything that's a part of the Wikipedia app is actually HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. That includes the search bar and the header at the top. That includes the navigational pieces at the bottom, and then all the content that's actually rendered inside there. And this I know is available on iOS, Android, and BlackBerry. You can target whichever platforms you want when you're building a PhoneGap application. Some people use PhoneGap applications to literally just target one platform, and just so that they can build it using familiar technology. Some people choose PhoneGap because it gives them the ability to target 8, 9 different platforms, all with a single code base. Here's an application I like. How many people like beer? Okay, good number of hands. I expected hands for that. Untapped is a social network that's really focused around the love of beer. You can connect with your friends. You can say, what am I drinking right now? You can rate different beers and add notes like, oh, I like the certain hoppiness and the flavor profile, whatever. But their cross-platform application strategy is built on PhoneGap. So the mobile app, which I know that they've got it on iOS and Android, I think on BlackBerry. I'm not sure if they're on BlackBerry or not. But everything that you see here, including the header, the footer, all the content that's inside there, the map that you see here, that's all purely web standards-based HTML implementation. Here's another one. I like this one because it looks really unique. It doesn't look like what everyone assumes. Oh, inside of a system web view, it's got to look like HTML. This is it's BitTimer. It's a workout interval timer for iOS, and it's got this really slick-looking kind of, for lack of a better term, futuristic type UI that looks really great. And it's a great user experience. This is a case. I know this application. They only targeted iOS, but they just wanted to build it in HTML. But this is a PhoneGap application. So the next one I want to show, and I'll actually show this app running live, is the US Census browser. And this is actually a sample application that I put together to demonstrate to the US Census Bureau how they can take advantage of PhoneGap for their mobile application strategy. It's got everything that you see. Well, it's actually really hard to see on this projector. But we've got a list on the side. You can select items in the list, and that's going to change the content that's being driven in the main body area. Everything that you see in here is, there's data visualization, there's textual information, there's interactive maps. All of that is actually an HTML-based interface. So another one, this is a tool that we developed internally, used internally within Adobe. All the charts, the graphs, everything that you see here, this is actually a calendar, which is really hard to see. But all of this is an HTML-based implementation, and that's rendering CRM information live from Salesforce. So I intended those to kind of give an idea of what you can create with PhoneGap, and now I think it's a good opportunity to go ahead and show some live applications running. So let me switch over here. Make this a little bigger. There's a lot of glare. Actually, is there a light switch back there we can dim them or turn it down somehow? This would be perfect if we could get just those right there. Alright, that'll work. Thank you. Even better. Let's focus the camera. Try and get the best we can here. So, the first app I want to show is just to show you the kind of experience that you can create. And this actually has nothing to do with what I'll call an enterprise type app experience. How many people have children and are familiar with a Magnadoodle? Okay. For those that don't know what a Magnadoodle is, it's a children's drawing toy. It's this little magnetic pen. You can draw on the interface, or it's not an interface, but you can draw on the surface of it, and then you slide a slider at the bottom to erase it. And I have a 2-year-old daughter, and we play with it all the time. It's a really fun toy, when you have little kids. And as I was playing with it one day, I had this thought: why don't we? There's no reason I can't create this kind of an application experience inside of an app, and there's no reason it can't be done in PhoneGap, so just with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that's what we have right here. This app is available on iTunes right now, but I can go ahead and I can draw, let's say, a nice little smiley face. It's a drawing app. This is all powered by HTML5 Canvas. I can do some really interesting things, like I can, as I swipe on the bottom, I can erase it. I can do multi-finger drawing. It's very performant. And this is an iPad 2, so it's not even the latest generation of devices. But where it starts to get a little bit more interesting is when we do some more advanced concepts. Like, let's say if I want to use an image as a texture for the stroke when I'm doing the drawing. I can do simple things like when I tap, I've got little stars here. Or if I do an actual drawing, you can see that there's a lot of depth and texture to actually the rendering that happens here. And when I start to draw more complex shapes, they start to look a little bit more interesting. Like I said, this is all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It's not something like you would expect, just text on a page with hyperlinks that are underlined. It's a much more immersive, kind of creative type of experience. But I know everyone's not writing children's toy apps every day, or are you? No. So let me go ahead and show the US Census browser app, the one I was talking about a moment ago. So I mentioned earlier with this, I actually created this. I was meeting with the US Census Bureau to give them a product briefing, to introduce them to PhoneGap, and kind of help them understand how they could go about using it for their own mobile applications. I figured, what better way than to actually take their freely available data and build an app out of it? So I'll go ahead and select Georgia. What county are we in right now?
Cobb.
Cobb. You can tell I'm not from around here, right? So we'll go ahead and select Cobb County. Everything that's here, so this list, the transitions of content sliding in from the right-hand side to the left-hand side, the data visualizations that we see here, the map up in the top, the headers on top, everything is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Right here we're showing age, or population by age. Right here I can show population by age and gender. I can go ahead and see an ethnic distribution. All of this is just based on the information that's freely available from the US Census Bureau. I can go ahead and select some other ones so you can see those nice transitions again. Or I can go ahead and have an interactive map. Or, I don't know. Oh, I no longer selected Cobb County. I was like, that doesn't look like right here. But anyway, that's a PhoneGap application that's much more of the enterprise kind of data visualization type scenario. And so I showed it on the iPad. Let me go ahead and show the exact same app running on an Android device. So this is, oops, wrong app. So this is a Google Nexus 7 tablet. So it's an Android 4 tablet. Oops, I forgot I didn't put the back button support in there. So I'll go ahead and select Georgia again. We'll just select Banks County. You get the idea. It's the exact same application experience. Every single bit of this is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the next app I want to show, let me go ahead and show some apps running on phones. And I'm not going to go into too many different apps here so that I can get back to the presentation and talk about some more meaningful things. But I do want to show a couple more apps. That one not turn off. That's awesome, isn't it? Maybe if I turn that one off. Okay, that's not working well at all. Fantastic. Okay, here we go. So, how many people use Capital One for banking? Wow, it's fewer people than I thought. Maybe it's not that big in this region. But Capital One, their mobile applications for banking, sorry I'm moving it around so much, is actually a PhoneGap application. So if I wanted to go ahead and let's say I want to find all the ATMs that are near my current location, do that. And this is available, no, okay, that would be why there's not many Capital One people here. There are no Capital Ones here. But Capital One, their mobile application available on iOS and Android, and I think BlackBerry also. But it's a PhoneGap application. Everything is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and it is the portal for accessing the mobile banking needs. So, okay, I'll try and show this one again. And the lighting is really just not working for me. But so here's an application also. This is a PhoneGap app. Has anyone ever heard of PolitiFact? Okay, so PolitiFact is it's like this political fact-checking organization. It started with I think it's the Tampa Bay Times. They have some mobile applications, and in this one it's called PolitiFact Settle It, where you could go ahead and you could select certain topics. Actually, I don't even know which ones. I'm not a big political person. Which topic should I search for?
Gun control.
Gun control? We'll see what happens here. I don't know if I have if there's any data for this or not. But basically, you can search for specific topics. If there's data, it'll pull it back, and then you can see what political figures are saying about this to try and use it as an argument ender type of application. But this is a cross-platform app. You know, it's what you expect for an app-like experience. But the entire UI, everything is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that is a PhoneGap application. So let me see. Let me show you just one other, what I'll call like more creative type PhoneGap app, and then I'll switch back to my presentation here. Okay. So this one is called Kooky, and this is actually a children's book. It contains an entire children's book inside this app, as well as an entire feature-length film. And so what I can do is, I can swipe through this kind of rich-looking world. Let's say if I want to go ahead and I want to actually watch the movie. Everything that's part of this interface, the swiping, the world, the trees, in this case the video playback, it's all standard HTML elements. This one is just HTML5 video. I can jump ahead. We have the full video happening here. If I wanted to be full screen, I can. I'll go back and let me switch back to the phone view, or not phone view, sorry, the book view. So in this case, it's an app. They're all based on standard web technology. So it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. As I mentioned earlier, let's say you already know jQuery, or you already know Sencha, or you already know Backbone.js, AngularJS, whatever framework. You're already building apps using these tools. You can leverage those exact same tools to then go ahead and build natively installed mobile app experiences that you can then have running on iOS devices and Android devices and Windows devices, and that whole list that I mentioned earlier. So let me jump back to my presentation.
How long did it take you to build that census app?
About a week. And that includes aggregating the data, because the data from Census for that particular data set was across 50 different database files. So I had to merge all of them, put them into one database, put it into SQL Server. I use Cold Fusion as on the back end just because it's really, really easy to create, expose it as a RESTful service. And I'm an Adobe employee. I love Cold Fusion. But then, what do I do here? So I took all that and then I put the UI together. For the UI, I have already kind of like a UI framework that I use. It's called App UI. I've released it as open source. And that's what the view navigators that slide from right to left with the different components, and also the portrait versus, actually I didn't even show the portrait versus landscape orientation stuff. But that's all part of App UI. And so I already had that, and I just put together the different views, added in some data visualization libraries. And so that initial prototype took literally 1 week. Now, it's gone through one revision since then, so it's got a little bit more polish, like gradients and everything. But the initial prototype for that took 1 week, and I delivered it on iOS and Android. So, building PhoneGap apps. Now that I've shown apps, I've talked about it, oh, what are the advantages, whatever. One of the big questions is also, but what's the actual developer experience like? How do you go about building them? And so, if you have any questions about this, definitely ask them. It's dark in here, so you have to raise your hands high if you have questions. But you can, because you're editing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can edit these files using whatever you want. Any kind of text editor. If you want to use VI, you can do that. I know a lot of people that actually use VI as their primary editor. But you can use Xcode to deploy to iOS devices. You can use Eclipse to deploy to Android devices, and that's Windows, Mac, or Linux. You can use Visual Studio to deploy to Windows devices. Wow, with the lights off, that thing is like blinding. But basically, if you're already using particular tools for enterprise HTML development, you can use those same tools. If you want to deploy to the device directly over USB, you have to use one of these tools that we have that's listed right here. But let's say if you want to develop for Apple devices, but you don't have a Mac, or if you want to, be able to develop these types of experiences and just be able to, have your code compiled without actually having to have all the developer tools installed, you can leverage PhoneGap Build. And PhoneGap Build is a service from Adobe. Basically, think of it as a PhoneGap compiler in the cloud. You can either point it at a Git repository, and it'll pull your code and do a cloud-based compilation, so you don't have to have all the Android and Apple and Microsoft development tools installed. Or you can just upload a zip file that contains all your application assets, and then it'll do that cloud-based compilation for you. So let me actually jump over to PhoneGap Build here. The colors are really kind of washed out, so it's hard to see. But basically, so this is PhoneGap Build. When I create an app, I can create it, I give it a name, I can upload a zip file to it, and what it's going to do is it's going to, once I upload the code, it's going to compile everything for me without having to have everything on my local machine. It can give you the status for iOS, Android, Windows Phone, BlackBerry, WebOS, and Bada. And when I have it, it'll give you status for each build. And then what you can do is, let me actually just pull up a QR code reader here, and let's say I have this is assuming I have a reliable network connection, is once it's compiled, I can just, oh, that's not going to work with my hand in front of it. Okay, so let me switch back to my camera here. So we'll hit yes. It's going to go ahead and it's going to download that file from PhoneGap Build, assuming my network connection is fast enough to reliably download it. Okay, it's downloaded, or it's downloading. It's done. Hit that. We'll install it. And so what this app is that I'm showing here is just, it's a basic app that I put together. I've released it open source too. And it pulls data from Rotten Tomatoes, the movie review website. So the first time you run it, it had to extract everything, I got it. And so I've now got a PhoneGap app installed on here. I can go ahead and see information about these different movies. And in order to get that on the phone, all I had to do was snap a picture of that QR code, and now I've got this app running on the device. And so that's kind of the power of PhoneGap Build, is that I didn't have to have this connected to my computer via USB and have the entire development environment set up. I pushed the code to PhoneGap Build, which yes, I had it before this presentation, but once I had the code up there, all I had to do was snap that picture of the QR code, and I now have the app running on the device. And so it can definitely be a way to simplify that building, or the compilation and build process for all these different platforms. Just upload it, let the cloud manage the actual compilation of the app. What's also really cool about this is PhoneGap Build is actually integrated in Dreamweaver CS6. So here's the app I was just showing you. I've got the code on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is actually a live preview. And if I make some changes, I can just hit, where's my mouse? Right here, the rebuild application button. Right here, if I do that, it's going to push the code up to PhoneGap Build. It's going to trigger the compilation for me again. And then once it's compiled, I have the QR code. Without ever having to leave Dreamweaver, I can snap a picture and get that on my device. So it's another pathway to building these types of applications. So now let's talk about debugging PhoneGap apps. The number one tool that I use in my workflow for developing PhoneGap applications is the Google Chrome browser. And that's because, in my opinion, it has fantastic developer tools. It has everything you would expect from a robust development environment, including the available to introspect the DOM, change CSS styles, hit breakpoints in JavaScript. You can even run SQL queries on your web SQL database inside the Chrome browser, and it has, or you could get to the level of JavaScript or memory profiling, so you can find performance issues and you really get down into the nitty-gritty, down and dirty, what's happening inside of your application. Also built on top of the Chrome browser, which has these awesome developer tools, is the PhoneGap emulator, which is based on the open source Ripple emulation environment. And now, the Ripple emulator, let me just go ahead and switch over to it right now. Here's an app that I'm currently developing. I'll click around with it. If it breaks, I apologize. It's because I'm still developing it. But this is a PhoneGap application running inside the Ripple emulator. I've got the whole development environment over on this, or developer tools showing up on this side. Is anyone not familiar with the Chrome developer tools? Okay. Basically, on any HTML experience, you can just right-click and hit Inspect Element. That's going to bring up the Chrome developer tools, which give you a lot, and I really mean a lot of features to inspect and debug an HTML-based user experience. It'll give you the HTML structure, all the different CSS styles. You can see, oh, that's interesting. That's a lot of databases. You can see all the different files that are part of that experience. You can see all the different JavaScript files that make up that. You can set breakpoints inside of it. You can see it gives you an incredible amount of information that you would expect from a developer environment. What it also gives you, the PhoneGap emulator, is the ability to mimic PhoneGap APIs. So if I want to access the accelerometer events, I can just interact with this little widget down here, and if I click and drag, it's going to trigger accelerometer events inside the app experience. If I want to change the aspect ratio of the device, up here on the top left-hand side, I know it's hard to see, but you can actually change the device profile. So if you want it to look like an iPad, or if you want it to look like a Nexus tablet, you can do that. If you want to simulate network events, so the type of network, if you want to introduce latency, or if you want to work with online, offline events, you can do that. If you want to simulate geolocation events, you can do that just by entering lat/long manually, or there's a map which is below the page fold here, where you can choose a location. And basically, anytime that you're interacting with this, you're triggering events that are part of the PhoneGap API. So you can simulate basically the entire app experience without ever having to leave your desktop browser. This is hugely productive when you're developing app experiences, because you're in your editor, you're typing, you switch over to Chrome, And inside the PhoneGap emulator, you can see how's your app working, how's it running, are things behaving as expected as far as the logic of the application goes. And it's an incredible time saver. However, I will emphasize that absolutely nothing replaces on-device testing. And this is where things get a little bit more challenging, but just because the nature of a PhoneGap app is it's running inside of a web view on the disconnected mobile device. Now, with iOS 6, you can actually leverage Safari developer tools and have a remote development experience. So I have an app, in this case, it's running on a phone here. If it's plugged in by USB, Safari can actually connect to the session that's running in the web view on the mobile device, and you can use Safari's developer tools, which are, they're basically the same as Chrome developer tools because they're all based on WebKit. I think the UI is a little bit easier on the Chrome ones, but it'll give you the same level of introspection of DOM, modifying CSS, profiling, setting breakpoints. You can do all that in an app that's running on that remote device. Now, if you're not running iOS 6, you can leverage debug.phonegap.com, which is based on the open source Winery project. And Winery stands for Web Inspector Remote. It's going to give you an interface that looks pretty similar with the ability to inspect and modify the DOM, inspect and modify CSS styles. It won't give you the ability to set like breakpoints in JavaScript, but it's definitely a helpful tool for trying to develop and debug an experience that's running on a remote device. There's another tool called iWeb Inspector, which is kind of similar, but that's targeting specifically iOS 5. If you want to have your app running in the simulator, you can have that disconnected developer experience. Now, those are some of the tools for actually developing those apps. The developer experience of actually building them. But, sorry, the contrast on this one is not fantastic. I hope you guys can read this in the background. But if you're using existing frameworks, let's say you're already using AngularJS, or you're already using Backbone.js, or you're already using jQuery, you're already using Sencha, whatever tools that you're using for web-based interactive experiences, you can then leverage those exact same skills to create natively installed mobile apps. So for example, let's say you have an existing code base that leverages Sencha, or an existing code base and you heavily use Twitter Bootstrap for UI styling. You can use those exact same libraries without any changes inside the mobile experience on a PhoneGap application. I mentioned earlier that a lot of people often ask, what does a PhoneGap application look like? And I say it can look like absolutely anything. But if you want it to look like an app experience, there's a lot of open source tools that you can use to give you a default UI framework to use within your applications. Here's a list of them. I will make these slides public. Actually, there's a version of these that's already public on my blog. But things like Twitter Bootstrap, jQuery Mobile, Sencha Touch, Enyo, Kendo UI, App UI, Zurb Foundation, Mooble, like all of these give you UI components and styles that you can use then when you're creating these app experiences. So they're all HTML, they're all HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And one of the #1 things that when you're creating these apps, and especially if you're targeting iOS, because iOS has a strict curation system, is you need to focus on your app experience. Make your app feel like an app. Don't make it feel like a web page. If it doesn't have a good user experience, Apple will frown upon that. And so using these types of tools, you can get started on the right path by you're creating something that feels and looks like an app instead of something that just looks like text on a page. How many people visualize data in their apps? Okay. I expected more. But so data visualization, I actually have another presentation that I give. I just gave it last week in New York on data visualization with web standards. Basically, any kind of complex data visualization that you might be doing right now, if you're targeting the desktop browser, you can also do those exact same things in the mobile browsers. Primarily, let's say HTML5 canvas, yeah, you can use that. You're doing SVG-based visualization, yeah, you can do that. You can even use what I'll call creative use of HTML DOM elements to do, different elements of data visualization, whether it's a simple charting application or whether it is, let's say, for example, mapping, web-based mapping. Pretty much all those are creative use of HTML DOM elements. They're maps that have images, they have context, and they have lat long coordinates that are assigned to them. Any kind of overlay is basically another image or if you're doing point polygon overlay, maybe it's SVG on top of those HTML DOM elements. But basically, any kind of strategy you might already be using for data visualization, you can keep using that. Now, here's a couple different frameworks that you can use inside PhoneGap applications. High charts, that's actually the one that I used in the Census app. Sencha Touch has a charting suite. Kendo UI has a charting suite. AM Charts is a JavaScript visualization tool. rgraph, library for doing canvas-based data visualization. There's Raphael.js, and there's one G.Raphael, which is a charting-based framework on top of SVG. And there's another really good framework called D3, which these are all tools that can be used for creating interactive data experiences in HTML applications. So what if you want more? And when I say what if you want more, I mean what if you want more than PhoneGap can give you right out of the box? Let's say you want to tie into NFC plugin on Android, or if you want to tie into peer-to-peer Bluetooth connectivity on GameKit on iOS. These are native libraries. You can create what are called native plugins. And native plugins allow you to create a piece of native code and expose a JavaScript interface for that. And the JavaScript interface you can then leverage inside your application experience in PhoneGap. So you can actually have PhoneGap, this entire, your application logic all in JavaScript, drive what's happening in the native code layer just by creating that the native plugin for that. And let me go ahead and switch over to kind of give you an idea. Let me see if I still have the app installed on here. Sorry. Please tell me I did not uninstall it. I don't think I did. Okay, never mind. I uninstalled the app that I was going to show. So, in that case, let me just switch over to a different one. So here's an app. This is just a really, really simple Halloween sound effects app. And one of the things with PhoneGap, or not PhoneGap, actually, with HTML experiences is audio programming can be challenging, especially if you want multi-voice polyphonic audio. And so what I did is I created a native extension that went down to the native layer to create multi-voice polyphonic audio. So if I want to have sound effects, let me make sure my sound is turned up. Halloween sound effects. I know that one's really annoying, but if you notice, I have sound effects, but I was able to, as many times as I tap it, I have that same sound playing over top of itself again. And if I want to do something that's a little bit more involved, let's say you've got my thunderstorm. So I just delegated to the native layer to handle the really rich audio processing features and did the entire UI layer with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So that's an example where I drop down with a native plugin to do advanced multimedia programming. So, and those are called PhoneGap native plugins. Now, how many people are familiar with Apache Cordova? A couple hands. So when Adobe acquired the company Nitobi, which was the original creators of PhoneGap, PhoneGap has always been free and open source. But in order to kind of give the project legs to get it, better adoption, more people using it, we've actually contributed to the Apache Software Foundation. And PhoneGap is the best way to think of it is the Adobe distribution of Apache Cordova. But if you want all the underlying source code, you want to get involved with the project, you want to contribute to it, you can go to well, actually this link is the old one. It's no longer an incubator level project, but you can go to the Apache Cordova website, get involved with the program, start building it, adding your own features, or hang it. If you want to fork it and build something on top of it, you can. But PhoneGap is built on top of the Apache Cordova project. And that kind of leads me into where I said we wanted to get legs behind it, get more people involved. Talk about who's using PhoneGap right now. Adobe, obviously, we're using it in our own applications, and we're also integrating it into different products, like we have the integration with Dreamweaver. But, and we are the primary entity contributing to the Apache Cordova project. But there's also companies like IBM. So IBM has an entire mobile development suite of tools called Worklight. Worklight is based on Apache Cordova. And there's also a large number of core committers to the Apache Cordova project that are coming from IBM. There's Microsoft. Not only has Microsoft leveraged PhoneGap in some of their applications, But there's core committers that are from Microsoft, especially when we talk about targeting Microsoft's mobile devices. Salesforce.com. Has anybody used Salesforce.com's hybrid mobile SDK? I saw one hand. Well, the hybrid mobile SDK for Salesforce is actually is built on top of PhoneGap. Basically, what they've done is fork PhoneGap and add in a custom implementation to hook into their data systems. But you actually build your entire application experience using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and it uses the same native to JavaScript bridge that PhoneGap applications use. SAP. SAP has a partnership with Adobe to leverage PhoneGap for hybrid mobile solutions. I mentioned already Wikipedia. The Wikipedia mobile apps are based on PhoneGap. RIM, or I guess they've rebranded themselves as BlackBerry now, but everybody knows the BlackBerry product line. There are core committers from BlackBerry who are involved with the Apache Cordova project. The PhoneGap emulator, which is built on top of the open source Ripple project. Ripple came from RIM, came from BlackBerry. So there's a lot of entities beyond just Adobe who are involved with the PhoneGap ecosystem with Apache Cordova. And this is just a really, really, really small list, but there's some big recognizable brands, so that's why I wanted to show it. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for sticking around. I know it's really dark in here. Makes you want to take a nap. But my name is Andy Trice. I'm a developer evangelist with Adobe. I'm always here to answer questions. My email is atrice@adobe.com. My blog is tricedesigns.com. And on Twitter, I'm Andy Trice. And yeah, feel free to reach out with any questions at any time. Yes?
So, what's the other competitors to this in the market?
There are some. I don't let the competitors do their own marketing. But I mean, I'd say the number one thing that we actually compete with is people saying, oh, do I want to use PhoneGap or I just want to roll my own with a web view? And what's interesting is if you try to roll your own hybrid mobile framework with a web view, you're actually going to do the work that with the Cordova and PhoneGap projects that we've already done. So I would say that's probably the biggest competition is people trying to do it themselves when they can leverage something that's already existing. Oh, and at Adobe, we also have a tool, Adobe Air, for cross-platform mobile development on Flash platform technologies. Yeah.
How much faster is a PhoneGap app than a web browser?
Say that again?
How much faster is it when you compile into PhoneGap than just a web app?
So PhoneGap, the advantage of PhoneGap is it gives you the ability to interact. First of all, so if anyone couldn't hear, the question is how much faster is a PhoneGap app versus a web app? And actually, the PhoneGap app runs inside of the system web view, not inside of the native mobile browser. And so it's limited by the capabilities of the system web view for whatever platform you're targeting. So on iOS, it doesn't get the JavaScript Nitro, or no, the JavaScript, is it the Nitro engine? I can't remember the name of the engine, but the fast engine that's in mobile Safari. On Android, the default browser is Chrome, which the system web view is based on the legacy web view, so it doesn't have some of the performance improvements that Chrome has. But what PhoneGap does give you is that cross-platform app ability. So you can have one code base that's natively installed, and it gives you the ability to interact with the native operating system layer. So it's not going to give you a performance advantage over a just mobile web app, but it gives you the ability to access those features, like if you want to search contacts on the device or read right to the file system or access whatever custom native code you want. And then it also gives you that pathway to get into the like the app stores, like iTunes Store, the Google Play Market.
So do you have any performance tools so you can test the performance on different platforms?
Not necessarily any performance tools. At least I'm not aware of specific performance testing tools. But the workflow that I use and that I think a lot of PhoneGap developers use is build the app experience on the desktop browser and then test it on as many devices as possible to try and find if there's any quirks on that device or if there's any performance issues on those devices, in particular on older devices. Yeah?
When you said that people can develop their own native plugins, did you mean like if I wanted to access the iOS audio, then I have to go in and write something in Objective-C?
Yes, you can do that. You don't have to. There is PhoneGap classes that are that allow you to manage multimedia. But the sample I use is because I had a really particular audio case that I wanted to do, and so I went to the native layer to do that. But you can access any native API through the when you're building a native plugin. So it's basically any custom native code. But the things that I mentioned at the beginning that are out of the box, like if searching the context on device, the sensors, the file system, multimedia, all that stuff you get out of the box without having to write any native code. So no Objective-C, no Java, no C#. Any other questions?
No.
Oh, yeah.
So you laid out the pros very nicely. If you were evaluating doing a native app versus supporting kind of multiple code bases versus PhoneGap, what would the cons to this look like?
I mean, what I mentioned at the beginning, where native is going to give you the absolute best performance, and native is going to give you an unrestricted, or not necessarily unrestricted, but access to every device API without having to go through the native plugin model. So if you want absolute control over every single aspect of it and every way that it's rendered and performance is critical, like then you go with the native application. But with PhoneGap, if you think about how many devices are already out in the world that can render HTML, one of the advantages of PhoneGap is that it delegates the UI rendering of HTML to the device and all the pretty much. I'd be surprised if there's a single device in someone's pocket right now that can't render HTML, and so we just let the devices handle that. And because the HTML rendering is based upon the system web view for whatever platform you're targeting, there are also sometimes differences in how it might render on one platform for another. Like if you talk about Android 2 versus Android 4 even, or Android 2 versus iOS 6, the Android WebKit engine, Android 2 is older, it doesn't have all the same features. Actually, Android 2, it's starting at 2.2 or 2.3, I don't remember which one exactly. It doesn't support HTML5 audio, it doesn't support HTML5 video, it doesn't have a lot of CSS3 styles. So you have to kind of understand when you're coming into the project what devices do you want to target, and then from there, build your application experience, build your HTML, build your JavaScript so it's compatible with that range of devices that you do want to target. I saw another hand over here. Yeah.
So for the UI toolkit, so how much of a native look is perfection to my experience? You don't know the difference.
So the question was, how close can you get to a native look and feel in a PhoneGap app? You can get to what I would call near perfection, but the drawback to trying to get to absolute perfection with it is that if, let's say, Apple releases a new version of the operating system like they did with iOS 6 and they change something minor, or with Android where each major revision of Android has a very different look and feel, then you're always playing catch up, and if they introduce some new things, it can be a challenge to keep up with it. What I recommend is actually creating a really good user experience and a app look and feel that's unique to your application. Because if you try and mirror everything that's native, then if you get something that's just not quite there, then it stands out. But if you have an app experience like the branding, the UI styles, the colors, the styles of the button, the interactions that are unique to your app, then people start to understand, oh, no, that's just how this app is. It's the same on iOS and Android. That's their brand. And my finding is that unique experience is a better strategy because people don't fall into what's called the uncanny valley experience, where the uncanny valley meaning it's really close, but there's something that's just a hair off, so it makes you not like the experience. There's another question in there. Yeah.
Native plugins, you have to write that for every platform?
So if you want a native plugin, for what you get out of the box with PhoneGap, no. That's all works consistently across different platforms. But if you want to access custom native code, then yes, because there's a JavaScript API, a JavaScript endpoint, then there's a native code layer. And so let's say if you're talking to low-level communication libraries or drivers to connect to a different piece of hardware, that's going to be platform specific. So the native aspect of it has to be platform specific. But you can have the same JavaScript endpoint or JavaScript API that's consistent across, let's say, iOS and Android, and then you just have the native counterpart that mirrors that JavaScript interface. And the only difference is that the two native implementations. Yeah?
Do you have access to push notifications out of the box?
You can tie in, there are open source native plugins that allow you to hook into push notifications, but there are open source plugins that allow you to do that. And also in PhoneGap build, there is the push notification support. The native plugin is actually bundled in PhoneGap build, so you can take advantage of it. Yeah.
So on the build services, I don't have to have any of the native tools?
Nope. You can just push up your code, download the binary, and you will have to use, for Apple, their signing implementation, so you need your .p12 file and your mobile provisioning certificate, because you have to follow the rules of the ecosystem to get the app on the device, and Apple is the most restrictive of those.
Okay.
But there are ways to, let's say if you're on Windows, there's ways to generate those certificates on Windows, and once you upload your certificate to PhoneGap build, it handles all the compilation. It actually, behind the scenes, compiles it for iOS on a Mac, and it just leverages whatever you upload. So you don't have to have Xcode installed. You don't have to have Eclipse installed. You don't have to have Android developer tools installed. You don't have to have Visual Studio installed. Like I said, if you want to use Notepad or you want to use VI and you just push it up as a zip, you can do that. So it definitely simplifies that workflow. Yeah.
But for that, do you have to have the device listed as one of your test devices for iOS?
Yes. So you have to follow the same rules as far as actually provisioning and getting onto the device, but it cuts out the step of having to have Xcode, or if you want to develop it from a Windows device, it gives you the ability to do that. Any other questions?
Yeah, you listed a lot of UI frameworks, and I know the PhoneGap guy was in town. He said, try not to use any because you have performance problems, because some of them are so heavyweight. And like Sencha, he mentioned that. But which of those would you say are the lighter weight frameworks that are popular?
Well, the one that I mentioned, App UI, I use that in pretty much all my apps because I actually wrote it. Yeah. And I wrote that because I had frustrations with some other ones that weren't as performant. I don't necessarily know that we'd say don't use any frameworks, because there's a lot of advantages to different frameworks. Like I use Twitter Bootstrap all the time. It's really, really great for PhoneGap apps. I use App UI all the time. I know a lot of people that are really successful with Sencha. There are some that are less performant, but I don't necessarily want to call them out while I'm on camera. But if you want the absolute lightest weight, the best way to do that is to go with your own just CSS styles with a very minimalistic approach, and say I'm only going to use these ones that I put together that I know are going to be really, really fast. But like I said, there's frameworks out there that are performant. You can create really good app experiences. Like that, the Capital One app I showed, that one is Sencha. The Census app and some of the ones I showed are the App UI framework that I did. And so I feel like I keep plugging my own thing, but yeah, there are options that are out there. Any other questions?
When you use Twitter Bootstrap, though, do you? I was just learning about it today, but do you use the whole thing, or do you use a subset of it?
I use a subset. So I download the whole thing, then you normally only use like a subset of different styles. Like actually the Census app also, that one's App UI and Twitter Bootstrap. So all the button styles that are in that, I have some modal dialogues that are in there. The modal dialogues, all that is Twitter Bootstrap. So I definitely recommend that one for jumping in and getting started. Cool. Well, thank you, everybody.